Hello there, sword friends. Today I'm going to ramble about this sword right here. It is a Bugei Samurai Katana made by Bugei, or maybe made by Hanwei, but I'll talk about that in a second. Before I do, you should know that this is a second-hand sword. It was used and abused by the previous owner. That tradition continued with me. It is the guest sword, the sword I hand to people that don't know how to necessarily use swords when they cut for the first time, and I happen to be there providing the sword for that event. So I don't necessarily get mad that it gets diminished by new hands, because it really can't get much more diminished than it already is. So you should keep in mind that this is not at all representative of what you would expect to see if you were to order one new from Bugei, now that they have re-emerged into the market. And on that note, you should know that Bugei was gone for a little while. They seemed to disappear or go out of business for a moment there, and now they seem to be back, and their website offers the Samurai Katana as well as their other offerings, and you can procure one again. So it was a good chance for me to ramble a little bit about the Samurai Katana. Anyway, Bugei, as far as I can tell, in terms of manufacturing, doesn't actually make their swords. They farm that out to different manufacturers. The namely, I should say, Hanwei, seems to be the one that makes most of their stuff. And to that end, really, they seem to be like a rebadged Hanwei sword. Bugei products, in my experience, I've had a number of Bugei swords and Hanwei swords, and they seem to be relatively similar to the higher-end Hanwei swords like the Kami, the Tiger, the Tori. The folded steel iterations from Hanwei have a similar build and overall quality level to the Bugei pieces. I've read that supposedly Bugei pieces have a higher level of quality control, or maybe more thought behind the designs and geometry and things like that, but I personally haven't seen that come through in the swords that I've owned from both companies. Most of the swords that I've had, I would say, were just Hanwei, though some were distributed through Bugei or designed by Bugei. Anyway, to me, they're all pretty much Hanwei swords, though I should know that I believe Bugei does sell swords that are not only made by Hanwei. There could be a variety of other manufacturers they've opted to work with, but the vast majority of them, this one included, I believe, are manufactured by Hanwei. Anyway, on that note, I'm going to talk about the assembly, the fit, the finish, and all of that. So what I see on the kashira here is a little samurai guy, and he is holding his sword over his head. And again, these I think are made by Hanwei, and so what I see is just a pretty overall good casting quality. There's a lot of detail in here for a mass production kind of stamped out or cast fuchi, and that is going to be consistent in the rest. Now this is a pretty simplistic sword. It doesn't have a whole lot of bells and whistles, a whole lot of bedazzlements, but what it does have seems to be reasonably well done. Over here we have a separate shidodome that I can get my fingernail under just a little bit. As the kashira meets up with the ito here, the knot has held in place pretty well, but what I also see is that the ledges here are kind of jutting out just a little bit. They're not terribly well positioned. If I can get my camera to focus, they do stick out just a little bit. Now the edges are not sharp, so it doesn't bite into my hand, and when I use it, I can't say that I notice it, but this sticks out in a way that I would say is not necessarily great, though I don't know how well or how much that was the case when it was bought. You can kind of see here it started to wear a little bit from hands rubbing up against the kashira a little bit where it sticks out from the ito. Anyway, the knots are still tight. One thing that Hanwei typically does, or has a common tendency to do, is make loose ito, or ito that loosens quite a bit over time. This hasn't been rewrapped to the best of my knowledge, and it is still pretty tight. What you can also notice here is that there are decent levels or grades of samegawa here, pretty large nodules. Now these are paneled samegawa, but still the overall quality on it is pretty good, and I would say the diamonds on this one are actually not as misshapen as I have seen on some Hanwei pieces, though I wouldn't necessarily call it fantastic either. Overall, though, it's held up remarkably well. The ito does move around a little bit under pressure, but it's not so bad, and it doesn't have what I would call the conventional axe handle. This is on the thinner side for Hanwei. It's a little bit more refined in terms of shape, though then again some of the older pieces just tended to be that way. Anyway, it's a comfortable size. The Menuki are gold. I don't think the casting quality is terribly great on these. I can't necessarily make out what they are. There's some sort of kanji or text. I'm not exactly sure. Anyway, Menuki. The good news is they don't move, and you can also see that the ito doesn't move around very easily over the top of them. That's a common complaint, is that the Menuki ito, or the ito over the Menuki, tends to move around quite a bit more. This is looser, but it's not grotesquely so. On to the fuchi, what we can see is, again, we have the same character, kind of the unarmored samurai holding a sword. Again, casting quality, pretty well done. It's meant to be subtle, at least that's what I believe the intention is, and I would say that I can make out some reasonable details and kind of how the fabric is flowing. There's a little bit of detail on the face. I mean, it could be better, but overall, it's a pretty small face, and I can make out the eyes and the nose and the profile, and those are details that are easily muffled in other manufacturers' casting. One thing that I think Hanwei does really well. On the other side of the Fuji, it's very plain, and we can also notice that it's separating. So the Samegawa panel, I can basically make out the wood underneath, and that's something that happens with new swords, or it certainly could have come with that gap, or it may have developed given that it's gone through a lot of different changes in temperature, and it's something that can happen as the handle expands and contracts and whatnot. Things will shrink from their original shape, and these kind of unsightly seam areas can develop. The tsuba has kind of an ishime or stippled texture to it. I'm not sure exactly what you'd call it. It has a very glossy finish, which you can see in the light here, and this samurai character is, again, on the sword. You can make out, even though it's pretty simple, you can see kind of some of the finer details and kind of the Ito weave. You can make out some details on the face. It's overall a pretty well cast piece. Again, that's just something that Hanwei seems to do really well, and flows even on the Bugei pieces, which I would say are a little bit more pragmatic in their design. They're not overly embellished, but I think overall it goes pretty well. I really like kind of Bugei's practical but well done kind of designs. They have their own unique little flair to them, and I do like how they capture the Japanese aesthetic and kind of really take advantage of what Hanwei can do well without really overdoing it. It'd be easy to really try and bedazzle these too much, and they'd be gaudy, and it's tough to basically nail a simple design like this. I mean, it maybe seems really like an easy thing to do, especially for me. You throw a swirly Mitsudome on, and you'll say, "Shut up and take my money." But anyway, the point is, I think they do these things pretty well. This is a reasonably well cast figure, in my opinion. On the reverse side of the tsuba, you can make out some simple text here, and again, we have the same kind of stippled texture. You can also see that the tsuba wiggles around a little bit. It's not a ton. It's not the end of the world. This could be easily fixed, but it's not really that big a deal when it comes to actually using the sword. A lot of people get really mad about this stuff, and I mean, ideally it doesn't have wiggle in it, but it's, again, something that happens pretty easily with swords and is relatively easily remedied. A lot of times people make a bigger deal out of this than they should, in my opinion. If I move the other way, it doesn't move up and down, just kind of a little bit of lateral play. What you can do is take the tsuba off and give it a little whack with a nail set around the groove. It helps it hold on a little more, and it's not the end of the world in terms of work to do. And if I can do it, I'm pretty confident most people can, because I'm pretty useless when it comes to working on swords myself. I should also note that this glossy stippled texture doesn't appear to be the way they come now. It looks like on the manufacturer's website that the new version of the fittings is slightly duller, or doesn't have the same kind of glossy texture. In any case, this is how they used to come. I can't speak for the new ones. If I move on to the habaki, same kind of generic brass habaki. Hanwei doesn't really make a whole lot of different habaki. Sometimes they have a rain pattern, but for the most part, they're pretty plain Jane brass habaki. I don't know that a lot of people really care about them. They must not, because there's not a lot of variety in what they offer. In terms of the saya, we have a horn koiguchi, kurigata, come on, focus, horn kurigata, and horn kojuri. The lacquer on this has held up pretty well. It's been pinged and dinged a lot, and you can see it's still in overall pretty decent shape. Now the sword will freely fall out of the saya. It doesn't hold on at all, but again, something that could easily be fixed. One thing that I was actually fortunate enough to come by is some time ago I did a review on a swords of Northshire Katana, and they made this custom saya for me with a bedazzled swirly Mitsudome on it, and the sword is sitting off to the side broken, but it actually fit the Bugei Samurai and holds everything reasonably tight. Now, it doesn't rattle, it doesn't draw all that well either. It binds a little bit in the saya, but at least I have a spare saya for the guest sword, and it's shiny and pretty, so I guess I lucked out in that way. It's pretty rare to find, just a spare saya laying around that would fit a sword like this. So now we're going to talk about the sword, and what you can see here is that it is severely diminished, and this is where it stands out more than anywhere else. It's got a big secondary bevel from being sharpened, and you can make out lots of scratches, but you can also see that the original hamon still remains somewhat. It's, obscured by all of the deficiencies in the blade, all the scratches and imperfections that have come about over a long life of use, but you can still make out some of the good details. And towards the base of the habaki here, it starts to become a little easier to recognize some of the aesthetic qualities that may have been present when this blade originally came together. It's a little less used near the habaki, and so there are some more effects of folded steel and less significant blemishes in this area, though much of the hada is really not there anymore. It's been diminished over time from years and years and years of having some metal polish trying to clean this up, or uchiko powder being rubbed on it. You can really not make out much of a hada anymore, but assumably this blade would have come with the same type of folded steel that most Hanwei KC 120 folded steel blades would, and if you've seen a hada on one of those, that would be, I suppose, the metallurgical effect, or the effect of the folded steel that you would expect to see. But know that it diminishes if you sharpen it and you buff it and abuse it like this one has. It becomes much harder to see that folded steel, even though it's under there somewhere. And with a heavy etch, I'm sure it could be brought out again, but I don't know that it's worth sending off to somebody to do that. Now the Kazaki has this reinforced section, not something you commonly see on a lot of mass production swords, or at least it's something a lot of the cheaper ones tend to miss out on. It's nice that it's reinforced, but you can see that the tip is worn off here slightly from, well, whatever happened. And in a nutshell, it doesn't guarantee that the Kazaki is going to survive, though it is the mark of at least an additional cost in manufacturing and skill. Now, for once, the damage on this sword wasn't me. The previous owner did some sword-on-sword contact with this. You can see there are kind of nicks in the blade from doing kind of passing maneuvers and binding the sword with another metal sword. And in effect, it's held up really well. I mean, this sword still cuts and moves well. It's a beefy, chunky sword, but it still cuts tatami mats surprisingly well, despite the secondary bevel, despite the imperfections and all of the detriments that could come to cutting that result from some of these blemishes and things that tatami could catch on. It still moves through mats really, really well. It's a bear to move around. I wouldn't describe it as a fun sword to move, but at the same time, it's big. It's supposed to be heavy, and it's obviously taken a beating, and it's still straight and still very usable as a sword, which is a testament to how well these swords hold up over time. Now, I noted earlier that it has this nice swell, which is kind of a testament to Hanwei's manufacturing. It's some thought in the geometry, and the blade feels well thought out in the hand as well. I'll put the weapon dynamics computer in the link in the description down below. But I mean, the thing that's worth saying is that it does feel like an intentionally built sword, not quite to the level of custom, but at the same time, it's a comfortable enough sword. Despite it being beefy, I can still maneuver it one-handed slightly. It certainly comes alive in two hands, and it's not something I would necessarily want to do iaido with for a long time, but cutting with it for a few rounds is not overly problematic. The downside of the blade, though, is that it does have some ripples in the surface, which are pretty consistent with Hanwei's manufacturing, something that you see in a lot of Hanwei blades. So, meaning that despite its high price, it certainly could be better. The lines aren't as crisp as they could be, and this isn't a great example of how crisp the lines may be out of the factory, but I would say that They could always be a little bit better on the Hanwei blades. It's not bad though, and it does the job. Anyway, now's the part of the review where I answer the question, do I personally think it's worth it or not? And one thing I didn't mention earlier is that this sword is $1,500 right now on Bugei's website. When this sword was bought, I'm guessing it was probably closer to $1,200. I guess I can't be sure on that. My memory is fuzzy on what these used to cost, but I'm guessing around $1,200, maybe $1,000. It's tough for me to remember. And on Bugei's website, you can select different sizes, different handle lengths, things like that, to basically take the fittings of the sword if you like them and have them suit your needs in terms of length a little bit more effectively. Maybe you don't want the longest one like this, you want something cut down a little bit more. I think they range from 26 to 30-ish inches, that's ballpark on the blades. Anyway, the long and the short of it is, despite the options, despite the fact that this has held up really well over time and still does the job, despite it's done sword-on-sword contact and lived to tell the tale, I really think $1,500 is a lot of money for basically what amounts to a glorified Hanwei sword. I like the fittings, I like the theme. If you do too, I wouldn't say that it's a rip-off or that you should avoid buying them. It just seems a little over what the value you're getting, and I personally have a lot of trouble justifying spending $1,500 on something like this now, when $1,500 can go a long way towards getting something more in the custom realm of things, or something from Citadel, for example, which I think really steps it up a notch in almost every way. Or you can get something much less expensive that still delivers the length and some of the customized options and some of the nice things from companies like Jayco Swords or Swords of Northshire. So I have trouble recommending $1,500 for something like this. I do like it. I do think it's not a rip-off, and if you like something about this sword in particular, then I would say go for it. If you like the story, if you like the theme, if you like the people that make it, whatever it happens to be. I wouldn't call it a rip-off exactly, but I would say that it doesn't go a long way in terms of value, at least not in the market today. At least those are my thoughts. Anyway, that's all I have for you. I hope the video's been interesting, and as always, cheers and thanks for watching.